I know that this ship has sailed. The chamber is advertising their $50 luncheon thing on March 24th to hear Kathy and Russell Evans talk about the new TIF. I understand it's all been decided. I'd like to make some comments, if I can, just in opposition, and ask us maybe to slow down and continue to process this, because I think that this is a better proposal than a year ago. The design guidelines are good. The way that the things we've learned about the schools, it's a better proposal. It's a better proposal because of the discussion that we had. I wish there wouldn't have been the media blackout. I wish we could have got the media involved and gotten the public involved to a greater extent, because we're all the beneficiaries of that when that happens, and it hasn't happened in this case on something that's bigger than the original maps. We're increasing TIF 2 by $44 million. We are wildly in excess of our original budget of about $47 million. I don't know at what point you say you've met your goal if you're at 400% of your original budget. We have $63 million in TIF 2 now that are not allocated. $63 million that we can now spend. Everything that all the area for the Core to Shore plan is included in TIF 2. And we have $63 million that have not been allocated that we can spend on economic development. It seems like we should finish our dinner before we go on to dessert. Let's spend the $63 million, which we know we're still 9 years away from the goal line, from the finish line. We know that's going to increase just as we're increasing at $44 million today. It could be $100 million. Why don't we spend the $100 million first and then expand 6 new TIF districts? I think what's clear is that from this process, what limited public discussion we've had, which really came from, I think, Greg Leroy coming. Greg Leroy came. The only 2 council persons that took up the offer to meet with him was Pete and James, and we learned for the first time about the whole school formula. We didn't know through the first 9 TIFs about how the TIF funds the state formula and what impact that would have on I-89. I-89 lost out on all kinds of funds through the first 9 TIFs because we didn't understand the formula, and neither did the school board, and neither did the Alliance for Economic Development, and I don't think anybody on the Horseshoe understood it. If anybody did, they didn't say anything in the last 5 years. Nobody in the media talked about it. So it was clear that we had picked up a weapon, and we were deploying this weapon that we didn't understand how it worked. And that's because we weren't having enough public discussion, enough public input, and the media was just nowhere to be found. So in this process in the last year, we've found that TIFs work in a very different way than we thought. The impact on the schools is very different than we thought through the first 9 TIFs, and now we have something that's very different in terms of the schools. And I was there when the baby was born. Pete was there. We met with Laura Massenot and Greg Leroy, and Leslie Batchelor explained it to us. For the first time, I think we all understood that how the state formula, that these allocations to I-89 don't get counted to the state formula allocation. It had never been understood before that. And it's because he came and we looked into it and we had this discussion. When we as a council just relied on a couple of people a year and before to tell us, we missed out. We missed out by not having a greater, so I'm just asking, what's the rush? What is the rush to create 6 new TIF districts? We're expanding TIF 2 by $44 million. You've got $63 million to spend. I have 3 main problems with the way this has been presented. Number 1, you cannot in any way prove causation. The idea that we're going to create these TIF programs and it is going to create $1.8 billion of investment is preposterous, it's farcical, it can't be proven. It is, you cannot say that you're going to give a developer 6% of their development costs and then you claim 100% of the economic development as a result of the TIF when you gave 6%. There is massive investment, massive public investment in this area, far, far greater than any other part of Oklahoma City. We built a new highway, for heaven's sakes. I-40, we're building a boulevard through this area. Project 180, GO bonds that went to Myria Gardens, MAPS 1, MAPS 3. We're building a downtown park, a downtown streetcar, which Finally, we got an article in the Oklahoma yesterday indicating that it's a real estate development tool. A downtown convention center. The idea that this is going to create that couple of $1 billion in investment is preposterous. There is already, because of this massive public investment, things changing on the ground. Property values are exploding. I don't need to tell this council that because we couldn't afford the land for the convention center, and we can't afford the land, all the land we want for the park. Why? Because the property values are wildly increasing already without us doing anything. You don't need to prime the pump. The bonfire's already going. You don't need this to get development, economic development. It's already in motion. It's already happening, and we've been on the short end of that because we can't afford it because the property values are increasing. The property values, there's been 50 properties that have sold west of the park since the MAPS 3 vote. The average price of all land sales is more than 300% higher than their assessed value. There is, in addition, you don't know what development you've suppressed by unleashing this publicly subsidized private development. When you partner with certain private developers and you give them public money, well, the other developers have to compete against them. And not only do they have to compete against them, the existing development, the existing apartments, the existing retail, they have to compete against this artificial entity that you've unleashed into the market. So you don't know what economic development you've suppressed in that equation. And then there are clearly some investments that result in no economic development. Sarge, I'm tired of Sarge coming up here, items from council every week talking about this development on 6th and Broadway. Sarge wants to talk about that we bought land that Meg had that then went to Chip Fudge, that then we bought with TIF funds. He thinks it's illegal because you can't buy from a council person. I think that's not true because technically we bought it from Chip Fudge. That is, you could argue about the intent of the law that you can't buy from a council person, but it's not in violation of the letter of the law. But that's not the issue, Sarge. The issue is, why did we use TIF funds to buy land on Southwest 6th and Broadway? What economic development came as a result of buying that land? Nothing, I would argue. So you cannot argue that these investments are just automatically resulting in economic development. Some clearly are not. There are some, the Frank Apartments on 11th and Francis. They came, they asked for TIF funds, they were denied, they built them anyway. Brent shared with me other developers who've come, who've asked, have been denied, they built them anyway. But if we'd give them TIF funds, I'm sure that we would have claimed responsibility, we would have claimed causation, but that it cannot be proved. The but-for clause cannot be proven. The second problem I have is that this is clearly tax diversion. And I hope that that argument is settled today. I know that there's been this back and forth that you can't call this a tax diversion, that some of this development would not happen but for the TIF funds, and therefore it's new property tax. There is no free money. If you're not increasing tax here, you're just diverting it from somewhere else. And the 499 Sheridan should be the nail in the coffin to that argument, because that didn't require TIF funds to get built. It was going to be built anyway. It's in TIF 2. Now you're moving, it would expire in 9 years and it would just go into its normal taxing jurisdictions. But now you're going to remove it from that and you're going to put it into a new court ashore so the clock starts over for 25 years. That is a tax diversion. So that I hope that that at least ends today. That we now call this what it is, which is we are moving taxes from one entity to another. And that the 499 Sheridan should be the nail in that coffin. There are winners in this program, I-89, but as Brian Bruce pointed out in the Journal Record, there are losers. And you are diverting money from education elsewhere throughout the state. And there are consequences to that. And you have to make sure that the development, that the money that you're doling out has greater benefit to society than the money you are taking away from education throughout the state, which is clearly suffering. Third, I think there's something here that I'm not smart enough to understand and that is not apparent. There has to be a reason for rushing to do 6 TIFs that hasn't been articulated publicly. I think that part of this is the convention center. That's just my own personal belief. I believe that when you now have created another $65 million of public improvements, another $9 million for the parking garage, we have this massive funding gap for the convention center complex. We don't have money for the parking garage. We don't have money for the convention center hotel. And in my gut, I think that's what this is really about. That's what we're really voting on today, is to create something that then we can take to convention center hotels and we can propose and say, look what we've created. We've got a $65 million budget for public improvements. We've got all this new money for parking garages. Now let's make it happen. But in my gut, I think that's what's happening today, although it hasn't been publicly articulated. For those reasons, I'll vote no. I will probably be the only no vote, but I hope that the discussion continues, because we are the beneficiary. Just as we were with the Oklahoma City Boulevard, we got a better project because we talked about it publicly. And I hope that that process continues as we move forward with the TIF programs. Thanks.
Okay, James?
This is an issue that I've gone back and forth on more than probably any of the other things that we've voted on. And I think the main reason is a lot of what Councilman White said, I agree with. The only thing that I heard him say that I didn't agree with is that I think that this actually is good planning. It's a good future plan, which is why I'm going to end up voting for the plan. But then I think I've heard Kathy say that the A will be the first thing. Unless something significant changes, I will be voting against creating that first TIF district, which is the South CBD. For the reason is because I don't think that area needs it. And at some point, we do have to let our foot off of the gas and see if the market can take off. And, but the reason I'm going to vote for this plan today is because there are areas that are in the plan that I think will need. If we voted in a couple years for the Cox Center site, I think that that's an area that probably will need it. The Producers Co-op, I think, will probably need it. But again, I just think it's time to see really what Pete was saying is that there's no way of really knowing if it's needed unless it's not there. So with that, I don't want to repeat everything that Pete said. He'll do it for him. He'll do it for me.
All right. Any other comments from council before we vote? All right. Do we have a motion on 9B?
Move the item.
All right. Cast your votes. Passes 8-1.